gonna move on now to Near. You have a certain series for us that's also been making the rounds hit on social media.
Yeah, sure has.
Mm.
I watched Chikyuu no Undou ni Tsuite, also
Yes.
known as Orb, on the movements of the Earth.
Yes, sir.
Um,
But near the Earth is an orb.
The Earth does not
yeah,
move.
it's true.
Yeah. Spoilers.
So, this is a Madhouse series.
Mm.
Um, this is a historical, in big air quotes, drama.
Yeah.
Um, about um the So I'll just say right now, this series is completely 100% totally historically bullshit in terms of
Yeah.
historical accuracy. Um,
Yeah.
there's nothing about this series that is historically accurate at all. But main premise is sort of the
It's kind of like how Maria the Virgin Witch kind of ended up, where obviously that had more like supernatural stuff, but a lot of
yeah
it's like it's thematic. Or wasn't there that one anime about the arte or whatever it was, right? Um
yeah yeah
it's kind of like that where it's like it's based around the general historical time. Um but it's not really it's kind of it's spiritual. You gotta
yeah
vibes it. Yeah.
Yeah, this one, I feel like this one takes it to like a whole nother level. Like if you're somebody who's like who played like Assassin's Creed or something, and
Uh-huh.
you were like upset about the historical inaccuracies, I think you will have an aneurysm watching this show. Um,
Yeah.
because there's nothing about this that's based in history at all. So the basic idea is sort of this is about the uh initial sort of researching and proliferation of the theory of heliocentrism among Western scholars. Now, in real history, uh, heliocentrism was sort of uh, popularized and sort of pushed into academia by Galileo, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the church at the time was kind of like, that's stupid. Shut up. Don't say that.
Yeah.
And they didn't really care that much because the idea that like the Earth was the center of the universe was kind of just like, yeah, like sure. And then somebody coming out with like a sort of different theory that ended up being true and had a lot of obviously had a lot of backing to it. Um, it didn't really subvert any of like the church's like ideals at all. So the church didn't really give a shit, right? They were kind of just like, that's dumb. Like, why are you trying to rock the boat or whatever?
Yeah,
But
that's the
they
biggest
didn't
part,
really,
rocking the boat. Yeah.
yeah, they didn't really care that much, right? However, in Chi, the church is evil as fuck. Um,
And this is again, this is not even a variant, to be honest, in anime. This is like standard fare. Because a lot of times it's like, especially in these sorts of settings, medieval, whatever, feudal settings, not not medieval feudal, but it's like what era is this one? But it's like in these sorts of settings, a lot of times the standard enemy, if it's not the corrupt duke or whatever, is the church,
yeah,
pretty much.
of course.
So yeah.
Um, so yeah, the um, the sort of, I guess, idea behind this is that you have the main characters, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of main characters in this show. Sort of stumble upon research or pursue the theory and idea of heliocentrism, which is the idea that the Earth and all of the planets within our solar system revolve around the sun instead of
Mhm.
everything revolving around the Earth. Um,
Mhm.
and they have to sort of be secretive and, you know, um, sort of under the radar because the
Mhm.
church and the Inquisition, if they found this out, would like arrest them and kill them and burn them
Yeah,
alive for
yeah.
heresy. Um, and obviously, historically, the church wouldn't have done that. Um, not to say that the church didn't do that for other
Yeah.
things at the time. They certainly
But they
did.
don't but they don't try to hammer every single nail,
Yeah, it's
essentially.
not. It's
Yeah.
because so I will say this show isn't bad. The show is the series isn't bad by any means, but
It's a little bit cheesy, I think you
it's
wanna say.
it's if depending on how you can sort of suspend your disbelief for the way the church behaves and sort of I guess your attitudes towards
Yeah.
theology in general,
Uh-huh.
I think your mileage is going to vary wildly with the show. Um,
Yeah.
because when I was watching this, to me, it seemed a bit obvious that the author has some sort of bitter resentment towards the Christian faith and sort of theology throughout history in general.
See,
Um,
I don't, well, I don't what I think is, like, I think the author yeah, I think the author sort of has a bias, but I think a lot of the stuff in this story comes from the standard. We need not a rotating enemy, but we need an enemy in that makes sense in this premise in this setting. And obviously, again, like because of heliocentrism, versus what is the Latin name? The the
geocentrism.
Earth, yeah, geocentrism, right? Um, being involved somewhat with a church, it was a very easy target for a Japanese author to just be like, "Oh, yeah, of course, it's the fucking Christian church that is fucking shit up." It's very similar to like, um, I don't know, it's like, like people, for instance, in American literature, writing a lot of stuff that's like these like weird corporations like fucking stuff up, or maybe sometimes racist, whatever,
I
blah
mean, this
blah.
is
A
probably
lot
this
of
is probably
common
just like
enemy
a
and
very like oversimplification or remembrance of like Galileo, right? Like just
or
being
even
like,
just like
oh, who
because
locked him
yeah,
up, or in a lot of cases, people think of who killed Galileo, and it's like, no,
yeah,
it was the
and also
Inquisition, not technically just the church.
yeah,
And yes, he was
and
under
also
house
it's
arrest.
this like simplification of the idea of like obviously because the Christian Inquisition and people involved were
Yeah, so I
not very
will
smart. They
say
just kind of go in.
this series does make an active, well, I wouldn't say active, but it does draw a pretty clear distinction between the Inquisition and the church, right? These are separate sort of bodies, right?
Mhm.
Um, so it's sort of fairly early on, it goes that like the Inquisition is more zealous than the church is, right? But later on in
Mhm.
the series, it turns around and says, no, actually, also the church is the one that is sort of spreading this idea that, and it's very, very, very heavy-handed later on, I will say. Um, it gets to the point where they literally say that um, like I forget what the line was, but it was so on the nose. It was like comical. It was basically like if you're reading books, you're sinning, and it was just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Yeah, and again, this very same thing happened in Maria the Virgin Witch as well. I want to say where it's like Maria is just like essentially depicted as like literally just I just want to live, bro. Like I'm just a witch. Like what the fuck do you want from me? And then the enemy again, the church, the Inquisition, whatever. In that case, was literally like, wow, you guys all need to be fucking destroyed. Fuck you. And it's like. I guess,
yeah.
but
But for this one, I feel like it's a bit different than Maria because Maria wasn't like. So the issue with this is I should sort of get into like the characters themselves to sort of demonstrate this a bit more
The
clearly.
nuance, yeah.
So the initial main character is a young boy named Rafal. He's 12 years old, sort of genius, gifted child, right? And um, he is a bit of a manipulator, right? He finds it very easy to lie to people to sort of immediately earn their respect or get what he wants. Um, you know, he lies about wanting to study theology so he can get into the good graces of his father, who happens to be very devout to the church. Um, and when he gets into university at an extremely young age of 12, um, he says he's going to be studying theology. However, his real sort of passion that he wants to study is astrology, right? He's fascinated by the stars and their movements, right? And he ends up sort of having a discussion with a someone who has been tried for heresy, who has sort of renounced that in order to achieve forgiveness, right? To be released by the Inquisition. And through talking to this guy, uh, Ruffle discovers that, he was lying, right? He didn't renounce that at all. And he's going to keep studying um, what he's studying, right? And what he ends up studying is heliocentrism, right? Um,
Right.
and Ruffle gets pulled into this. He starts buying into it despite some, initial hesitations. And he ends up, studying it as well. However, the Inquisition finds one of Raffles' books, and this other, older scientist dude takes the fall for Raffle. And he gets executed, and he sort of, um, goes through some shit where he's like, is this even worth doing? What should I do?
Yeah.
Um, and then the Inquisition ends up finding that it was actually Raffle that was studying this shit, right? So he gets arrested. Um, and the Inquisitor is basically like, you've got your whole life ahead of you, dude. If you just like, you
Stop studying. Stop
yeah, like
sciencing.
if you just stop studying this shit, you could just go to university, study theology. We don't have to do this. Um,
Mhm.
and as he's in prison, Raffle is like debating, should I just like give this shit up and like do whatever, or should I like stick by my guns, right? Um,
Mhm.
and he ends up sticking by his guns. In his court hearing, he's like, I believe in this shit. I'm based as fuck. Do
Yeah.
whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
Um, and he ends up poisoning himself in prison, and he dies,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then this series does a 10-year time skip, um, which
Okay.
is pretty wild. And then the second main character, uh,
This
Oxy,
is Cloud
who's
Atlas? What the
yeah,
fuck?
there's a lot of shit going on in this series, right?
Yeah, okay.
But I will say it does flow pretty well. It's not like
Yeah, it flows
it
better
doesn't
than
feel
Cloud Atlas.
yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel busy at all. Which is
Yeah.
pretty impressive. But the second main character, Oxy, is a sort of um mercenary, right? He works for basically nobles will sort of challenge each other to duels and stuff, and these other nobles will hire these dudes to fight for them, basically, so they don't have to put their
Mhm.
lives in danger. Um, and Oxy suffers from a sort of existential. I don't really want to say it's not really nihilism, but it's like he sort of suffers from this existential idea that um, because in his youth, a priest told him that because the world is the center of the universe, right? And because of that,
Mhm.
every bad thing in the universe gravitates towards the earth. And the reason for this is because God made the earth to teach humanity that sin is like basically the world fucking sucks, right? And the reason is of this is because humanity is like irredeemable, basically, which is definitely things that the church wouldn't say. I will say that much. But he has this
Obviously,
idea
there are
that
always extremists, but it's not like standard teachings
yeah,
necessarily. Yeah.
it's not like it's like
I don't know really
typically.
how well they would spread if the first thing you walk in and they're like, yeah, by the way, this is a
Everybody's fucked. Yeah.
shithole and
Yeah,
everything's
like the world is a
fucked.
shithole and everything is bad and
God's smiting
nothing
your
is
ass
good
either
and God
way.
hates you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's not really the way that the Christian faith is taught, but sure, go off. But he has this idea that the only way that anything good will happen to him is in heaven, basically, right? Because the world as it is fucked, right? Like there's nothing good in the world. And through his sort of partner that he works with this mercenary gang, they end up stumbling upon um, Rafal's notes, which are sort of hidden in the forest. It's like this whole series of events. I don't really want to. It's not too important on how they discover it, but they discover these notes, and his partner ends up dying, right? And his partner's like, "Listen, man, this shit's really important to me. Um, it's very obvious it's not important to you, but it's really important to me. And like as my dying wish, I kind of want you to like, take these notes and take them to, somebody who's able to like study them and, like sort of spread this, somehow, right? And show that there's you know, um like goodness in the world, basically, right? Like there is a sort of the idea that the earth and heaven are sort of um uh like commingling, right? Like the earth is one with the heavens, right? It's not that like the earth is just this singular point in the universe and then the heavens are like completely separated from mankind, right? That the idea
Yeah.
that the earth sort of swims within the heavens, right, is sort of how they depict it. And so Oxy's like, okay, I guess I'll do that. And he ends up meeting this monk named Bedeni. Um, and Bedeni is a scholarly dude who really likes to study, and he's also really arrogant. He's got this sort of um, this idea that he's one of these sort of great men in history who's out there to change the universe, right? And like if he just studies hard enough, he'll discover this like the secrets of God's vision, basically. And his sort of issue is um, when he looks at the stars and he sort of tracks the movements of planets through the sky, he notices that occasionally um, they pointed this out with Mars specifically, is that once every 2 years, if you track the placement of the movements of Mars throughout the sky, once every 2 years, it moves sort of backwards, right? Um, and obviously we know this because, the Earth rotates the sun and Mars rotates the sun at different speeds, right? And so, every once in a while, the orbits will be in such a position to where Mars's position in the sky sort of goes backwards for a little bit before it
Yeah, the
returns
orbits
to
only the revolutions only make
yeah,
sense if you consider heliocentrism, essentially.
yeah. And so Benini's idea or sort of gripe with the idea of geocentrism is how could God create a system where everything is sort of harmoniously moving around the earth, except for sometimes where it seemingly decides to move backwards for no reason at all, right? Um, and so Oxy seeks out Bedini, they find the notes together, and then it sort of becomes this weird journey where Benini's, sort of studying these notes for his own sort of pursuit of knowledge, and then through that, Oxy is sort of discovering the idea that the Earth isn't entirely a complete fucked up shithole, and it does in fact commingle with the heavens, and maybe there is actually goodness in this world and stuff like
Yeah,
that. There's other
yeah.
characters and stuff. There's a lot of characters in the show, but that is sort of the main idea in that through this sort of study of the heavens and stuff, Oxy sort of his worldview uh, becomes, a bit less uh, depressing and nihilistic, right? Um,
So
and
it's
it's
very interesting because this is because you would think that from the first arc, right? The whole point of this series is sort of it's not even really about the whole like heliocentrism or the Earth. It could be any science story, right? But it's like the whole point would in the first arc would be this fight for like uh independent thought versus the cruel orthodoxy of the church or whatever it is, right? So that
Yeah,
was like the
that's
initial
definitely
theme.
sort of
But
an aspect. I think that's sort of Bedeni's kind of motivation.
mhm.
But I do think the sort of idea of like uh the pursuit of the truth can sort of change your worldview on certain things,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
the
This
idea of
that
sort
was
of
more
being
represented in this arc, right?
yeah the
Than
idea
yeah.
of sort of being narrow-sighted within uh quote unquote religious dogma can can really uh impact the way you view the world, and it can do a lot of harm on your mental health, right?
Right,
um
right, right.
but yeah, it's an interesting take. It's an interesting sort of idea to tackle. um Again, I do think this series is pretty good. Like the characterization here is quite good. I think the characters are pretty good. Everybody's pretty grounded, except for some of the priests and stuff. Even the main um, Inquisitor dude, Nowak, he's like the sort of main um, antagonist throughout the series, and like he's like because they make a pretty uh clear distinction that like he's not part of the church, right? Like he's not really that
Mhm.
much of a believer. Obviously, because it's like fucking 14th century like indistinct Europe, right? He believes in God, right? Like he believes in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
God and the faith and the church, but like uh he's not really like doing it for the sake of God, right? Like he's kind of just doing it because he's a former soldier. It's solid, stable work. It's something that he's good at, right? Um, but yeah, like he like his motivations are he's not like cartoonishly evil, like he's an inquisitor,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
he's
yeah,
he's
yeah.
kind of doing it just as like sort of like the idea that if you just let um these quote unquote heretics sort of say whatever the fuck they want, then the sort of um, the uneducated peasantry, right? They're like, if these ideas spread, then
Yeah.
obviously the church will be destabilized, and chaos can come from that, stuff like that. So his sort of idea is more of like a keeping order kind of thing, and less of like,
Mhm.
yeah, I just love fucking arresting and torturing and killing people, man. It's so cool. Um, so the characters here are quite good. They're quite interesting.
Mhm.
It's just the idea that like, um, I guess just like the basic premise that like the church would just be so vitriolic about like the idea of like studying, the movement of the stars is just like it kind of takes you out of it, right? Um,
Again, I
because
think
like
that's just a consequence of I feel like it's a lot less like there is a bias, but I think it's a lot less conscious, like specific bias, and more just like coming from a place of simplicity is how I want to put it in very charitable words. So it's like, yeah, we need this enemy, and obviously in this premise, the enemy, the enemy to just be like, oh, fuck you all, is the um, is the church, and in this sense, sort of the Inquisitor that's like a little bit more human in this sense, right? Is sort of like the stormtroopers, like you know how it's like the stormtrooper, one of the stormtroopers that occasionally gets made into like a side story in Star
Yeah.
Wars in the Star
Yes.
Wars universe, right? It's like that essentially. It's like that equivalent. So I think it's mainly coming from that rather than
I feel
I
like
mean it.
have you watched any of this?
I watched like the first couple of episodes, but I
Yeah.
have not.
Again, I do feel like the scene between Bethany and the priest is where I got most of this idea that like the author again, I don't think it's a thing of where it's the author's like I hate Christianity. I hate Christianity. But I
Yeah,
do
yeah,
think he has this sort of whether conscious or not, this sort of bias against, you know, um theology and sort of its he definitely has a sort of idea that like the idea of theology being sort of ruling over a sort of the idea of theology being a ruling body of government, right? Like
hmm
he definitely sees that as like a very much a negative thing, right?
yeah,
um
yeah.
because there's definitely a few scenes where it's like um there's one where it's like, if you guys keep um if you guys keep sort of like censoring, research, speech, investigation into certain things, then um, there will become like different factions of the church, and the church will end up having like a civil war because it can't decide on what it should be studying or whatnot, and the idea that like the church being so anti you know, uh, like free ideals, it'll sort of bring itself down from the inside. Um,
hmm
and it just paints this picture of the church being like so like almost like maliciously like controlling of um what anybody can and can't say or think, that sort of leaves the realm of like, oh, they're just like a villain for us, and it's more of like, oh, this guy like straight up doesn't like religion, right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't think it's like a conscious thing that the author is doing. And I'm not really
But
necessarily saying this like,
I think it all also came together, right? Because it's like it's not just this, but it's not just like the bias he has, obviously, but I think it's also um the fact that he picked this premise specifically, right?
yeah,
And this
yeah,
premise is a very much an accelerant to an obvious, oh, like, well, the church is fucking these guys over kind of story, right?
yeah. And again, I don't think it's necessarily like hurting the narrative or anything, but
hmm
again, like I said, depending on the way you view sort of theology, especially how you um look back at like medieval theology and stuff, right? Like how far you're able to sort of suspend your disbelief in the way the church behaved in history and the way the church behaves in this series, it can sort of take you out of it in some scenes. I don't think it's necessarily an overall negative, but I do think it's something that uh, it did sort of stick out to me. Um,
Right, right,
but
right.
again, I don't think it ruins anything. Um, it is just sort of something that I was like, huh, I don't think this author likes religion. um, but yeah, like I said, all the characters and stuff are really good. The fact that like this series is going through like so many different characters, and it's going through like time jumps and you know stuff like that. It's jumping around quite a bit, and it doesn't feel like disorienting at all. It's quite impressive, right? Like it is well written, I will say. Um,
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah,
this. It's
I think
very
even just taking on this premise itself is like not something that I think, your standard run of the mill, not okay. Oh, my Japanese protagonist got isekai by truck. Like that sort of author would not be able to take on this premise. I'm just gonna say it flat out. So
yes.
I think, yeah.
Um, it is just a sort of odd decision to sort of make this premise and be like, I'm not going to be historically accurate at all. It's a bit of an odd choice. I don't think it's a bad choice necessarily, but it is an odd one for sure. Um, Again, your mileage is going to vary wildly depending on how much that bugs you. To me, it doesn't bug me that much because, it is sort of just a story. Like I said, they don't even specify like where in the world this is. Obviously, it's Europe because like uh, they do. They don't I don't think they straight up say it's like Christianity or Catholicism or whatever. But they do reference the Pope, so you know it's like it's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, overall for the story, I do think it's pretty good. But again, it's a it's hard to really um quantify like objectively. I think because again, I do think it's really up to the viewer in terms of like how much they're going to be able to sink their
How
teeth
much you
into with
don't
this
like,
one.
yeah, don't like parts of the exaggerated portions and what they mean in the overall message.
Yeah.
Can I also uh so this is already like essentially two arcs now, right? Do you think it's going to, this is supposed to be what, 25 episodes or something like that?
Yes,
Um
25 episodes.
is this, do you think this is going to be again something like a full Cloud Atlas omnibus style series where you have like five different arcs and like sets of protagonists, or what do you what?
Um, I don't know. So right now, obviously the initial character's dead, right? They've time skipped. So there's Oxy and Bedeni, and then there's the Inquisitor dude who's not really necessarily a main character, but he does get his own, sort of scenes, right?
Mhm.
And then in the recent episodes, they've sort of been dipping into this Jolenta character, this sort of young girl who, um, wants to be a sort of researcher in astronomy, right? And she's sort of looked down upon because she's a woman, right? Um,
Mhm.
but obviously, she has the support of the one. Um, I forget if he's a like part of the church or not, but he basically she's working under him and he's sort of supporting her and sort of trying to build up her confidence, and sort of teach her the idea that even if people sort of stand in your way, um, for like no good reason at all, uh, and that being the fact that she's a woman, like there's no reason she can't be a researcher just because she's a woman, but obviously because it's fucking 14th century Europe, um,
Yeah.
right? Like people are gonna look down at her just for that. So obviously she has her arc going on. I don't really think it's gonna go. I don't think that. I don't know, right? Because I haven't looked too far into like what the story does in the manga. But I don't think it's gonna do another time skip. I feel like it's probably gonna focus on this like core
You think so?
cast,
Okay.
probably.
So you
Um,
think the initial arc was more of like a prelude kind of thing, like an appetizer almost, like.
Sort of, yeah. I think it was kind of 'cause you know how like Vinland Saga has like the time skip, right? And even
Mhm.
something like um I don't know, like Metal Gear Solid 2, right? It has um like the Solid Snake segment at the beginning, and then it sort of does this sort of twist where it's like actually this is about Raiden, right?
Mhm.
I think the author was kind of trying to pull something like that, where it's like, yeah, this is a manga about a young boy, and he wants to study the stars, right? Um, and then the twist is that it's like, well, the Inquisition caught him, and now he's fucking dead, right? So I think that's that initial uh sort of prologue is sort of kind of, I guess it's a way to set up the stakes, right? In the idea that the church is sniffing out heresy pretty much everywhere, um, and that doesn't really matter who you are. If you get caught, you're fucked, right? And then it's sort of it's that sort of initial setting up the stakes, and then it's a bit of I don't want to say shock value because I feel like that's cheap, but it is sort of like oh shit, like the main character is dead, right? Like anything can happen, kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
okay. Yeah, just to emphasize, like, it's not quirky, it's just being like, okay, like, we're not gonna try to save the main protagonist from we're not
yeah,
gonna give him
yeah,
plot armor when he's literally in front of the fucking court of the Inquisition. Like, that's not gonna be a
yeah. And
thing.
it's also an
Yeah.
interesting dynamic because it goes from Rafal, who's like this literal, like he's like a young genius, right? And it
Uh,
literally makes a point to be like, yeah, like I could talk my way out of fucking anything, right?
yeah, yeah.
And then when the Inquisition finds him, he he can't do that, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, he's
you're
like,
fucked,
"Oops."
dude. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you're in a
exactly.
fucking jail cell, right?
Yeah.
And then it transitions from him to Oxy, who is a mercenary, who can't even read, and he's got this very sort of, um, down in the dumps, sort of depressed outlook on the world, right?
Mhm,
It's a very interesting sort of shift, right?
mhm.
And so I think that helps um, with sort of setting up the initial story as well. Again, I do think the characters in this are really really good, but um,
Mhm.
yeah, it's tricky to be super objective with this one. Um,
Yeah. Again, because a lot of the there's a lot of exaggerations made in order to further the sort of fictional character and emotional aspects of the story, right?
yeah.
So,
Um,
how you want to go over the audio visuals real quick? Because I know this is a Madhouse series, right? Or this is
yeah,
the Madhouse series.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think this is the only Madhouse series. Is this the only Madhouse
Um,
series of the season? I believe.
I think they're doing what was it, that uh Trillion game as well? They're doing that this
Oh
season,
yeah, I
right?
forgot about that. Yes, yes, yes. You're
So
correct.
so yeah, Madhouse is a bit split here. As for audio visuals, there's not really too much to, again, this is like a historical drama. Things are pretty lax. The animation itself is decent. It does its job, right? It's not like anything super impressive. I will say there are some scenes in this series that are like, I feel like I was looking at a black screen. Like some of the cuts in this
What?
are really dark, like really dark. Like there are some scenes where it's like they're walking through the woods at night, and it was just like I can't see it. I can't see anything.
What the
Um,
this is kind of like the same problem that was mentioned when Toast was covering the one with like the undead unwanted adventure or whatever it was, right? It was
yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
that where it's like everything is just like a dark dungeon everywhere or whatever it
Yeah,
was.
but this
Yeah.
is like it's really dark. And there's
Yeah.
there's like a short like fight scene in the dark in one of them, and it's like I can't I can't follow any of this, you know. Um, so there's some unfortunate art direction choices, I will say. Um, I do think the palette overall, the color palette works really well for the setting. It's pretty bleak, pretty muted. Um, it's very Europe, I will say. Um, um, the music is pretty good, I will say. Um, it's fairly, um, sort of what you would expect for the setting. But it fits.
Mm.
It's fairly immersive, as it were. Um, you know, I think Ushu Kensuke is actually working on this. But
He did a lot of different stuff. He did, Chainsaw. He helped with Chainsaw Man. He helped with Boogie Pop, the recent Boogie Pop Don Don Don.
yeah, um,
A lot of different stuff.
yeah,
So I think he's a pretty good OST guy actually, because
yeah, for
there are a lot
sure.
of these like yeah
He definitely seems to be the current sort of just go-to right now, where it's like, oh,
yeah
you need a music guy, just get Ushu Kensuke,
yeah
right?
yeah. He did
Um,
Monogatari
yeah,
stuff too.
yeah,
So
for
yeah.
sure. But yeah, the music's quite good. Um, the OP is Kaiju by Second Action. Um, I'm a big fan of Second Action, so it's cool to
Mhm.
see them in an anime OP. The OP visuals themselves are a little bit boring. Um, it's kind of just like a sort of montage of the characters sort of
And
walking,
the storyboarding,
yeah.
yeah.
Pretty standard stuff. I will say it was a neat little trick how in episodes 2 and 3, um, Rafal isn't the start of the OP. and after episode 3, Oxy is at the start of the OP because he's the new main character, right? It was a cute little um visual switcheroo. The ED is Aporia by Yorushika.
Mhm.
It's pretty standard. Nothing really to write home about. But yeah, overall, audio visuals they do the job, right? It's
Mhm.
Madhouse, so they don't look bad by any means, but also it's Madhouse, so I feel like they could have done a better job. But for a series like this, I feel like there wasn't necessarily too much incentive to go super far above and beyond, but it would have been nice to see, obviously. But
Mhm.
yeah, they do the job. They're good.
Okay.
But yeah,
Okay. Overall, what would you any closing words and what rating would you give it?
um, so I do think it's now this isn't really necessarily this doesn't really have but it's a bit of an aside, I will say. But a lot of the reviews I've seen for this both on Mall and outside of Mall, stuff like Twitter, um, you know, some 4chan discussion threads, stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
I see a lot of people, very odd to me. A lot of people sort of open the discourse with this series um, as like, you know, if you're really sick of isekai, you should check this out.
I literally did a double take right now. What?
And to
Okay.
me,
Okay.
I'm like, what? Like,
That's
I don't
yeah, that is nothing to do with
understand.
it.
I really don't understand the correlation here. But I've been seeing it a lot where it's like, yeah, man, the isekai this season suck, so you should check this out. And it's like, I don't, I don't get
Yeah,
it.
it's like
Like,
I
I
I mean, it's
don't
got
know
I
everything.
also
It's
if
feel
got
like that's
an
I
Earth.
don't
It's
know. Yeah,
got
I don't know if
the
isekai
church.
fans are like so genuinely brain rotten that they just see like a sort
everything
of
has to be connected back to isekai. Yeah,
yeah, it's
it's
just
just
sort of like a Western medieval setting that it's like, oh, this is like isekai, right? It's like,
that's also
no.
why this also points out their this is also a blow up over their constant like raising their like pushing up their eyeglass and being like, oh, excuse me, sir, technically not an isekai because the
Yeah,
dude, while he is a power fantasy MC in a medieval fantasy thing and he gets all these powers and blah blah blah, he's technically didn't get isekai from Japan. Well, it doesn't clearly doesn't matter because now you're making comparisons structurally of stuff that's not related to him being reincarnated, right? It's just the medieval
yeah,
setting. You're
yeah,
comparing within the isekai structures. So yeah, I think that's very interesting, and that also draws parallels to, I mean, even now when people are say um you're taking like these like rom-com situations or like some stuff that may have like a little bit more heavy romance, something that might be a little bit leaning towards a shoujo magazine reading audience, right? So like stuff like that, and people will be like, excuse me, this guy is a Chad. So if you want to actually read a manga with a Chad male character, male protagonist, instead of those beta males like blah blah
yeah,
blah, whatever other rom-coms, then you should check. It kind of reminds me of those parallels, to be honest.
yeah, a little bit.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, it
So
was just a very odd sort of trend that I was noticing in the discourse for this series.
uh,
It's just odd. Um, but yeah, overall, I do like the show. I think it's good.
mhm,
It's tricky to rate because again, um, I think it's good. I think it's well written. But I
mhm,
do think the choices to make this just like not even remotely historically accurate at all, yet still sort of um, propping itself up as a historical drama, I think
mhm.
that's gonna turn like a lot of people are gonna turn their noses up at it, right? Um,
Right, right, right.
so personally, I'd probably give this like probably 7.5, maybe an 8. It's sitting at an 8.2 right now on Mall, which is really high
Mhm,
for Mall. Uh, it's sort of tricky to get sort of a pulse on the like general consensus of this series because again, a lot of people are like weirdly comparing this to isekai. A lot of people are a lot of I see a lot of like red flags when I see people talking about this show. Like it's really deep and it's philosophical and it's mature, and I'm like, I don't trust your opinion when you say those
Yeah.
words, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. It's adult,
so
bro.
It really
it's like a
asks
secret
a
way of
lot of
saying
the
like this
tough
is adult
questions, like
series.
what if the Earth was round and
yeah,
like
like what if the Earth
went
like
round the
was
sun?
moving?
That'd be
What if like
Whoa.
crazy.
the church was like sometimes wrong on stuff and you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
that's
okay,
crazy.
like what do you
Like, what if
like where are we going with this?
what if religious dogma was bad? It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very
So
curious.
it's kind of hard to get a idea of like if people like this series because like they genuinely see the like the good character writing, or
Mm.
if they're like
They're just
unironically like
checking it off
r
to
they're like
be like,
r slash
yeah.
atheisming this series, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. They're
It's
they're just
tricky.
trying to jerk off because this series sounds slightly smarter than your average very brain dead series, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
yeah.
Again, I like the show. I think it's pretty good. I think 7.5 is fair. Um,
Okay.
but it's again, it's hard to recommend because like if you recommend this to anybody that has any sort of like interest in history, especially like European history, um,
Yes, yeah.
they're like they're gonna watch this and be like, this is fucking bullshit, right? So
Mhm,
you really kind of have to suspend your disbelief when watching this. But I do think the characters are very well written. Um,
mhm.
so
Okay.
yeah, it's a complicated one for sure. Um,
Alright. Well, again, I guess that was it. Then thank you very much, Near. I know, again, this was not an easy series to cover by any sense of the word, just because, I mean, the premise alone, but also um, to provide a proper kind of literary structural kind of analysis of it and not just be like, kind of get sucked into what you were implying just now, where it's like the jerking off to, oh, it's the church against the free thinking, and kind of getting too stuck on that part.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, this was again the one of two Madhouse series of this season, or on the movements of the Earth. Chikyuu no Undou ni tsuite. This is a manga original, I believe, by Uoto, so both story and art by Uoto. He did like one or two series before this, I believe. But yeah, this is his an anime adaptation of his manga, one of his manga works. So yeah, if you like y- if you like a series that kind of talks about, sort of like the free thought and how kind of going outside of the box kind of help change the perspectives of different fictional characters and how they develop in more organic ways, and having that centered around a more unique premise, right? Then please do check this out.